Welcome back to Ana Dialogue, the dialogue on analog music reproduction. So, after all this huge MoFi scandal debate, a lot of people in the vinyl community are questioning, are demanding themselves, what is happening? What are the true sources of our analog records? But that's not the only question a lot of people are asking themselves, that I am asking myself. Also, the mastering issues and costs. And in fact, this is going to be the main topic. But we do need a reference. We do need someone that has been doing this for many, many years, that has experience, knows the industry. Hence this interview. In fact, today we have a very special guest, which I would like to introduce you. We have the president of Speakers Corner Records, Kai Seemann. Thank you so much for being today here with us. So,
the pleasure on my side.
Thank you again for accepting this interview. So let's jump in because we have so many questions, and I don't want to be too long. Well, it's going to be a little long. So tell us immediately, what is Speakers Corner?
Yeah, I make this as short as possible because this is all our history. We are in business next year for 30 years. So we started in 1993 with the first 4 titles. Since then, we have published 607 titles. I just made a short run on our catalog. So quite a run over the years. The company stems from a hi-fi studio, which is still existing. I have there a partner with the same name, Kai, and he's still running the studio. That's it in short.
Very nice. Perfect. Well, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your responsibilities, your duties? What's your role in the label?
What's the goal? I think this is the best to start with this. First of all, our company name. I have to confess that the company name is very old, because the basis was a shop for do-it-yourself speakers. That's Speakers Corner. In the meantime, we regard our name more to the variety of our repertoire. You find in our catalog over the years everything between medieval dances and punk. So Speakers Corner is more or less like the corner in London, as you know, where you find every kind of musical repertoire. We are not specialized in anything. Our goal was a little involuntary to put out pure analog recordings. And pure analog means not only our mastering process, but also the recording process. This started with the first titles we put out in 1993, which were Decca classical recordings. And we didn't have any other chance than getting cut from the original master tapes. And this we continued with one exception, we continued till today. So it's our aim to reproduce LPs in the way the original mastering engineers and artists had intended to do it, but were not able at the time because of technical limitations. So we always use the very latest analog gear, pure analog, but do not alter the tapes very much. But this is a subject we discuss later.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's effectively, this is the answer on the question.
Thank you. Okay. So before diving in more in the mastering questions, how do you decide which record you want to reissue?
Actually, we removed this in the meantime. We had a suggestion form on our website. This is, of course, since we are 30 years old, this is only in the last 10 or 15 years. Before that, we got suggestions from customers, from the press, from the mastering engineers, from the repertoire owners. It was very obvious because the original records were very expensive. In the meantime, we have to decide by what the majors are giving us. Universal does not license at all here in Germany. Sony would license to us, but only third-class repertoire. And the only ones we are very happy with at the moment is Warner Music. So more or less, this is the reason why we removed the suggestion form, because we are so limited in the meantime that we focus only on one label for the time being.
Perfect. Yes, I want to, in fact, inform who is watching us that in contrast, I would say, with other labels, there's a fantastic website curated by Speaker's Corner, which is pure-analog.com. Obviously, you're going to find the link in the video description, where they go through each part, I would say, of the creation of a record. So don't miss that. Very, very cool. Very, very interesting. Okay, so let's start with our mastering section. And the first obvious question I have to ask is there any digital in the creation of a record, in your chain, in the mastering chain?
I know this is a very important issue at the moment, and I may give you a very simple and straightforward answer. No, none of our engineer has ever used any digital device in mastering our titles. There's one title, I'm sorry that I have always to repeat, to go back to this one, because it's somewhere the weak spot in our philosophy. There's one title which was recorded digitally, but we mastered from the analog master. So also there, our process was entirely analog.
Great. Fantastic. And I think a lot of people are sensing that when they play your records. Absolutely.
I think it's important to point this out and make this clear, because there are only, as far as I know, there are only very, very few companies on the market which are that strict. Actually, the only ones I know are Analog Productions, which have digital recordings in their catalog, but they always know this. So they are also transparent in there is. Many people who are buying LPs today want to buy an analog LP and hope that by chance the item they are buying, the title they are buying is analog. This does not happen, because analog mastering is much more important than when you master from a digital source. So if it is not clearly stating this is analog, it's digital.
Yes. On a side note, so do you think the industry needs again a sparse code vinyl productions?
Yeah, I believe the sparse codes had to be more spreaded. At the moment, you have just AAA, and the latest one is useless because you see it's a CD or an LP. You would have to, is it a digital recording or an analog recording? Is it mixed? What source was used to cut this very sound carrier? Yes, I think this is needed.
Yes.
But I think this is common sense in the meantime.
I agree. Okay, so let's go to our next question. So Speaker's Corner, maybe somebody doesn't know this, but it's actually something typical that takes place in several labels, does not master in the house. Can you explain us why and which mastering studios engineers you rely on mainly?
Why is obvious, because we don't have an own one, which I believe is a good thing, because we want to avoid a company sound. I must say that I'm not personally familiar with the mobile fidelity productions, and if they sound somehow alike, which I would assume, because they always use their own mastering facilities. And this is not what we want. As I said, we want to recreate what the original recording engineers and artists intended. So a family sound is not what we are at. We want to have the original sound.
Yes.
And this is why we go to studios which are authorized and experienced with the tapes we want to use. For example, Sony. Sony does not release original masters, as everybody knows. You can get either an analog copy or you can get a digital file. We use, of course, the analog copy, and we have we pay extra money that the senior mastering engineer, Mark Wilder, is doing the tape copies for us. This is a person which does 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, is dealing with these old tapes. He knows how to adjust the tape machine, how to the older a recording is, the less it was made to industry standards. When you have the tapes from the first half of the 60s, some of them are to the standards like RIAA for LPs. We have standards for tapes as well. I think it's NAB, and the other one I don't know. Sometimes they made the tapes, the master tape, according to the standards, some not. So you need personal experience. And of course, I would like to have, I would prefer to have the original master tape. But when I have the option of having Mark making a tape copy for us with all the experience he has, or have an original master tape to an engineer which has no experience, I prefer the tape copies. And that's what we get. We get from Mark Wilder made tape copies where the difference is, it is audible. There is a difference between the master tape and the copy, but there are other points in the record manufacturing which have a larger effect. For example, the vinyl formula makes a larger difference than the difference between an original master tape and the copy. What was the question initially?
Yes.
Actually, have I answered the question, or did I?
No, you have.
I have. Okay, thank you.
And I think this is very interesting.
You were asking. Sorry, you were asking which studios we use. We use the studios which are authorized to deal with the original tapes. This is for Universal Sterling Sound. When we get tape copies, it's we use a German studio, which is Emil Berliner Studios, because the tape copy is then obviously made to modern standards. So the difficult part has done Mark, and then the task to making a good record of is there you can go to any good studio, and there we have good experience with Emil Berliner Studios, and the Warner titles are cut by Coherent, which is also authorized by Warner.
Great, fantastic.
These are.
No, I just wanted to add a side note on what you were saying before, because it's incredible that people want or somehow must use the original master tapes. While in the past, all the original vinyl releases were made from working copies. I mean, practically nobody was using the master tape coming from the session tapes. They made a working copy and distributed worldwide. So that's perfectly normal, I think, and it's a great compromise. And all mastering facilities and labels should do that. I think it's a perfect compromise. Better than doing it.
It is. I absolutely agree with you. I must say that in my understanding as a record collector, which I am as you, yes. I always had the feeling that the mastering in the country where the recording was made, this was made from the original masters, and all other markets got copied. So when I want to buy a Beatles LP, I try to get an English pressing. This is my understanding, but I have to say I don't know this for sure. And there are millions of titles out there, and how they were individually mastered, I don't know as much as you.
Yes, well, that's true. In fact, in most cases where the record was produced, it sounds better, probably because they were using the master tape. Yes, probably not every time, but in most cases that's true. But the rest of the world, no. So, okay, so so you mentioned also the engineers, right? Clearly, if you were talking about Sterling.
In Sterling, it's Ryan Smith, and at Coherent is Kevin Gray. At Emil Berliner Studios, it's Emil Berliner, Rainer Maillard. In London, where we master the tapes which are stored in the UK, it's forgot the name. You see it on our website, pure-analog.com. There we name all the engineers we have worked together with.
But we understood. I mean, the best of the best. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, do you have control of the mastering phase? This was the next question, even though it takes place in another country.
Yes, I do, but I must say that I don't put this control in force very much. we have no fixed budget for the mastering. So when an engineer takes 4 or 5 hours to master this, that's how it is, and then we pay more, that's how it is. And we accept what is coming from there. When there is something where he is in doubt, he makes a digital file with the adjustments, how he would do it. He sends the file to me, and then we check it. And we say, okay, that's fine, or no, it's not fine, please alter it this in this way. And then I send it back, or let him know my changes, and the engineer applies this. But I must say, this is on the 600 titles we did, 5-10 occasions. In the vast majority, I trust on the knowledge of the engineers. So yes, we have control, and obviously we have the control when we check the test pressing. And also this has happened where we thought we can't do this. But in the most cases, when this has happened, that the test pressing was unsatisfying sound-wise, technically is another subject, but sound-wise, we normally don't publish it at all, because we always assume the relevant engineer has done its best. So yes, we have control. In practice, it does not happen.
Perfect. No, but it makes perfectly sense, obviously.
Yes.
In fact, connected to this topic, we were discussing, I remember by email, about analog delay. And
yeah,
that's something very interesting and important. Can you explain us a little bit why this is so important and why you request this to make your records?
Yes, I can do. You put in the graphic I send you later on in this video. Okay. The starting point of the LP is the so-called lacquer. The lacquer is an aluminum disc of, I don't know how much, 40 centimeters, about 40 centimeters, an aluminum disc, which is covered with lacquer. This is very soft. You can scratch it with your fingernail. This is where the information is cut in. It's with a little stylus. It's the reverse technique of your stylus in your yes. turntable. It's actively driven. It's also with little coils, which drives the cutting stylus. Since there is no groove, you have to put the groove on the lacquer, and the groove. It's not only the groove what you have on the lacquer, you also have the so-called land, which is the area between one turn of the groove and the next. The problem is that the groove gets wider the louder the signal is. So when you have a very loud program the whole record through, you only get about 18 to 20 minutes on one LP side.
Yes.
And you have therefore you have to adjust the movement of the cutter head. Normally, over the decades till the mid-70s, this was done with constant speed. So the engineer has to listen to the tape, find the loudest part of the program, and says, okay, this is the one I have to cut, and I need this much land between the turns of the groove. This was fixed, and then you only had 20 minutes of program on the LP. In the mid-70s, the first cutting lathe with variable pitch came on the market. The most common one is the Neumann VMS80, which all our studios are using. This is the latest cutting lathe which was produced. And there they were able to make the move of the cutting head variable in depending on the signal.
Yes.
Okay, now the diagram is coming. If you look at it, the tape is coming from the left.
Yes.
And first, it passes H1. H1 stands for head 1. There, the signal for the drive of the cutting head is taken. And then you see the tape, which is in red, passes several pulleys, 1, 2, 3, 4. The time you need from head 1 to over 1, 2, 3, 4 to head 2 is exactly half a turn of a LP. And when you now have a very loud signal at head 1, the movement of the cutting head is getting a little bit faster, so that the length between two turns of a groove is a little wider, so that you can cut the louder groove. Because what you definitely want to avoid as an idea is that two turns of a groove is hitting each other. Obviously, this is a defect which will result in the jump of your needle. This has to be avoided by all means. Okay, then the signal on H2 is the one which goes actually on the record. The one, this is very important, H1 is only the drive, H2 is the signal you hear on the LP. And this is done purely mechanically, that the tape travels a longer distance, and this is half a turn of the LP. This is how it was done as in the mid-70s till the mid-80s. You can see this is very elaborate to do, and the tape machines, which still have an analog delay, are very rare, very expensive. So it's much easier to do this digital, the delay. So still H1 drives the cut ahead, and H2 is fed by digital signal, which is delayed. And there we have the difference between analog delay, which is what we have here on our diagram, and digital delay is the delay on the signal. And what goes then on the LP is only as good as the as the digital delay. I'm sorry to say this again. The signal is the one which then gets digital, and this is obviously much easier to do, much cheaper. You can use any tape machine. You don't have to use a tape machine with analog delay. And the German magazine, print magazine Mint, vinyl print magazine, I don't know if you heard of it, says that more than 99% of all LPs made today are made with digital delay, but only with an analog delay like this, the recording, the LP is actually analog. This is the all important thing about this.
But this is I mean, it's shocking. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, I think. And for example, there was a recent video from Michael Fremer who in fact was mentioning this, which was taking place in the famous Japanese pressings, that they used an 8-bit digital delay.
8-bit? Oh.
Yeah.
8-bit is even worse than CD, isn't it?
I know, it's incredible. It's just shocking.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And as you were saying, it's difficult to find the Studers, the machines that have this extra head to do this analog delay. So fantastic.
A80s, even we had an A80. I don't know why we ever bought this, because we never used it. But A80s are, you can get them, they are expensive in the meantime, one of my better investments over the years. But A80s are very common, but A80s with analog delay are very rare. They're very, very rare.
I bet. Okay, that was very interesting. Our next question is regarding the lathe. Do you have any standards, or I mean, they're already probably in the mastering facilities. So, what is the most commonly used?
The most, I would assume that all of them are still existing, but obviously there's a big. Maybe I should go back to the analog delay. As I said, this was only in the mid-80s, in the mid-70s, that this came up. Before this, you had a constant drive. What you also could, with the constant drive, with the limitation that you don't get more than 20 minutes per LP side. Of course, the engineers were very unsatisfied with this, so they also could make a sheet. They listened to the original master. They could also do a sheet and say, okay, at minute 3, at minute 10, at minute 15, it gets very loud, and they adjusted manually the drive of the capping head. Then you also can obviously get more information on the LP side. But this is actually the reason why the records made till the mid-60s are so short, because they had the constant drive. Then the next step was that an engineer was standing next to the machine and was adjusting the drive. And then the next step was that it was done automatically via this analog. What I would like to point out is this is nothing negative. It's purely mechanical. The tape just travels a few centimeters more from one head to another. So it makes no difference if it, it goes the direct way from H1 to H2 or by the diversion. All our engineers, this is a coincidence, all the studios we are working with are using the Neumann VMS80, which is the very latest version of cutting lathe. This gives me the impression that we have picked the best studios because they also have picked the best machines.
Of course.
One of the engineers told me that they prefer the VMS80 over the older versions, is that this is mechanically much more rigid than the VMS70. He said it was Tony Hawkins who cut our Decker tiles. He said with a modern gear, he's not able to make records as bad as the originals were, because the tape machines are much better. And the VMS80 is by pure mechanical more rigidity. You can put much more dynamics in the lacquer than with the other machines. I don't know if Scully, I think that's the only other competitor on the market, American machines, if they ever produced a machine with variable pitch, or if this was only the VMS80, I don't know, but this is the industry standard.
Yes, yes.
Every engineer or every studio then can apply different amplifiers, different cutting heads, which all have a signature on the sound, of course. I believe all of them are using solid state amplifiers, because you need for the cutting head extremely power, several hundred watts per channel, and you only achieve this with solid state.
Oh, of course. Thank you, thank you. Okay, let's take a look now to something that you already explained me by email, which is very interesting. Again, something that a lot of people, I don't think they know. What is the average cost you're facing in mastering lacquers? The studio time?
This depends very much on the studio. Yeah, this depends. No, can you give you precise prices? It depends very much on the studio. The most price-worthy are EBS here in Berlin, because cutting vinyl is for them more a hobby than earning money. They're doing recordings for Deutsche Grammophon, and they earn enough money that you don't. It's his personal copy. He even has, I don't know if you noticed them, he has an own label, Berliner Meisterschallplatten, where they do direct-to-disc recordings with these cutting lathes. This is actually the reason that they still have these cutting lathes. And they are the cheapest, and the most expensive one is Sterling Sound. I always thought that they are New York, but obviously they have moved to Nashville. They're the most expensive ones we work with, and the rates are between 450 euro per hour up to $1,000 per hour. And you need at least twice the program material, because you have to listen through the tape entirely through if there are dropouts, sticky tape joints, etc. So they first listen to the tape, and assuming that everything is okay, they cut the LP, which is obviously the same time. So you need at least twice the program as studio time. But it happened that we paid $4,000 or $5,000 per title because it was difficult. So this is, and we don't forward these differences to the customer. We always have the same price. So to answer your question, between around $500 and $1,000 per site.
Okay.
Per hour, sorry, per hour.
Per hour, yes. And but how many lacquers are coming out from that process? Just one?
We only get one per site. Yeah. It is. Wow. We sometimes notice that they use more than one lacquer to make this lacquer for us, because they are very often, you have in a run-out groove, you have very often some kind of writing, and they are very precise. They mark which number of cut this is I get. So sometimes I get there a number of 3 or 4, so they have cut 3 or 4 lacquers until they were satisfied. But I only get one set, and I only pay one set.
Okay. So you can't order more if you would like to have more, or you can.
I could if I would.
Okay.
If I would also get. So as soon as the engineer has set his standard how to cut the title in question, he could produce as much as he want if we want it by. But this is usually not necessary because I assume you are familiar with the manufacturing process at the pressing plant, that you have mothers and fathers, positive, negative, etc. Usually cut lasts forever.
Okay.
So I think in all our business we had one title to recut once, where we really had made so many tools. It was selling so good that all tools were deteriorated. There we had to recut one title, but usually it's just one set we get.
I see. Perfect.
Then we get to follow this process. We get 30 test pressings out from this, which was very much more than standard, because it's not only us checking the test pressing. We have, as I said, a hi-fi studio in the background. They also check the test pressings. Sometimes we send it to press collectors, which want to compare to originals. So we have always sufficient number of test pressings to check.
Okay. So at this point, I think it's interesting if you can tell us a little bit about the routes, the different routes that the roads, the path that US and EU, European Union and United States lacquers follow.
Yeah.
Can you give us an idea?
This is, as I said, the surfaces of the lacquers are very sensitive. And it is said that the groove which has just cut into the lacquer is bouncing back over time. So you have to get in the bath, in the metal bath, as soon as possible.
Exactly. Yes.
So since we now cut the majority of our lacquers in the US, it takes too long to send them from the US to the palace to do the metal bath. So all titles cut in Europe are sent to the palace. They do the metal bath. And the titles which are cut in the US are sent to QRP, and we get tools. We get positives, mothers.
This is something interesting. I mean, I don't think many people know that Speaker's Corner in the US records are pressed at Quality Recording Pressings, right?
No, that's not true. The metal parts are made at QRP. Pressed, they are still at Palace. So we get tools for pressing the LPs. We tried another pressing plant with two titles, but apart from these two minor repressings, we never ever used another pressing plant at Palace. So the pressing is always at Palace.
Okay. Well, Palace, I mean, it's one of the best in the world. A lot of US productions send their records, their lacquers, and to do them here in Europe, in Germany. So that's very good. Okay.
We were distributing till March, till April of this year. We did our own distribution of our productions, but a lot of other labels as well, European labels, American labels from all kinds, RTI, QRP, Optimal, also in Germany. So we have seen a lot of pressings over the years, and I can tell you, you can have every problem you can imagine from every pressing plant.
I bet. Well, I mean, the technology is what it is. So
yeah, it is. I must say there are huge improvements in mastering, even in the analog domain, but the pressing has more or less stuck in the 80s.
Yes.
You have slightly different vinyl formulas, but the machines are mainly made, if you're lucky, in the 80s, even if there are a lot of companies which are manufacturing new machines, but they are copies of machines from the 80s. You can adjust a little the pressing time, the actual time where the LP is in the press. You can cool let them cool down longer, what we do. But there are very, very minor screws which you can turn to alter the pressing. It's more or less technology from the 80s.
Indeed, indeed. So maybe you said this, I'm not sure, but so who is making the stampers?
The stampers for manufacturing the actual LPs are always made at Pallers.
Oh, okay.
Let's go through the process.
Sure.
If you count with me, you start with a lacquer which you can play. Then it's sent to the metal bath where a father is made, which you can't play. From the father, you make a mother, which is positive. You can play. This is the first time where anybody can check if the mastering has gone right, or if we have, for example, a clash of the grooves because the driver head was not adjusted correctly. This is what we get from the US. We get the mother, the positives. They get to the Pallers. Pallers is making the stamper, which is negative, and presses the LP, which is positive.
Okay.
That's how the process is going.
So it's pretty much divided, the whole thing.
Yeah, but I was surprised to learn this, but obviously a mother is made to a common standard. You can use a mother from anybody to produce in any pressing plant LPs. And so it's obvious to do this, that we have the short time in the US from California to Salina, that we have the lacquer as fast as possible in the bath.
Great, great. Have you ever used DMM in any Speaker's Corner records?
No, ever. None of the studios we collaborate with is using DMM, and I would assume for good reason. I personally am not very fond of DMM. No, we never ever used this. No.
Okay. Well, very, very few. It's just to know if the one-step process that MoFi, for example, is using, I think it's something very similar, DMM, because you're jumping in phase. But it does have a different sound. It does have a different sound because there's no lacquer.
Yeah, that's the point.
It's a metal lacquer, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So more or less, how many copies do you press for each release?
Depends obviously on the demand. We don't make limited editions. I don't see the sense in this. The point is that mastering is so expensive that we need the initial pressing run to cover our costs. So on the initial pressing run, we don't earn money. This is just to get in the cost, and we earn money on the repressing. So why limit? This does not make sense. We start with 1,000 pieces usually. The problem is at the moment we sometimes have higher demands, and but the lead times at the pressing plants are so long in the meantime that I normally can change. So when we order 1,000 copies as in the initial pressing run, and then we announce the title, and then we get orders, and we say, oh, this does not fit. We have 2,000 orders, but then it's too late to increase the number. We have to live with 1,000 and disappoint a lot of customers. But our standard is 1,000 as an initial pressing run, and then we repress in 500 and 1,000 steps.
Okay.
That's how we do it.
And more or less for each release. There aren't
each release cases. As long as we have the licenses. Okay. This is actually the limitation we have, that the licenses on our the older titles we have, which we have since more than 5 or 10 years in our catalog, are not time limited. We can press as long as we want. So the contract as such is time limited, not the individual titles, but the last titles, the Warner titles, are all time limited. So after 3 or 5 years, we have to renew the contract, and either it gets prolonged or we have to cancel the title.
Okay.
And of course, it's depending on the demand, how many we press.
So this brings us to our next section, we could say. which I think it's quite interesting. A lot of people usually skip this, but I think it's important. The license costs.
Yeah.
So can you explain us a little bit what is a master recording license?
Um, yeah, we
What
discussed
are
this
the
already
fees?
via
What are
mail, and yeah, we discussed this already via mail, and I sent you, told you already a percentage, which actually I have to ask you to keep confidential. The point is, these are individual contracts with the three majors we work together with, Universal, Sony, and Warner, and these are these contracts are not made to be
no,
publicized.
no, no, but of course, no problem with that. But just explain us what is a master recording license versus the mechanical license, which we'll discuss after.
With yeah, this is something I never understand actually. I believe with the master recording license, we pay actually the musicians, and with the mechanical license, we pay the composers. And both we have to pay, obviously. There are a lot of labels out there which don't pay anything, but then you also don't get access to the master tape, which we need for our philosophy. So it's even on the, you would know obviously that in Europe we would not have to pay licenses on recordings older than 1963, which are many in our catalog. But we do this voluntarily because we want to have access to the master tape, and it varies between 25 and 35% on the PPD, which is the dealer's price. More precisely, I can't be.
No, no, of
please
course.
understand
Well,
this.
that's a large
Yeah.
large portion. I mean, that's a big price, obviously.
Yeah. But there's, I don't want to mention the name, but you are an audiophile since many years. I assume there was once a company which also had some machines in the backyard and pressed without paying licenses. And Sony Music realized this, and it took less than a month that the company was closed down. And I don't want to go down this risk.
No, no, okay. No, maybe I don't even know what you're talking about.
We were all surprised. Less than 1 month, amazingly.
Wow. Well,
yeah, they have really, when the legal department of a major calls you, you sit upright in your desk on your desk. Really, they have legal departments. They have own lawyers. You don't want them to call you.
Okay. But you can confirm me, because this is something, the information that I always had in my ears, in my mind, but I wasn't sure. There is this distinction: the master recording license and the mechanical royalties.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Are there any other royalties involved in the production of records beside these two?
No, not royalties. No. Sometimes we have some. We have one title, for example, which was an American, which was a Columbia, Miles Davis in Berlin. This was a very funny story. The Sony Music only had a digital file. They lost the analog tape, and Miles Davis in Berlin. So obviously that we are quite close to this, and we found out which radio station has the tape, and we obtained the tape and had obviously to pay them to use the tape, but this is the exception.
Okay, no, of course.
And actually Sony Music asked us if we could do a copy of the tape we have found, so that they have it now in an analog tape in their vault. It's not very funny.
So obviously who is licensing the record needs to know how many copies you're going to press. Clearly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we, very simple, we get a delivery note from Palace. We send the delivery note to the licensor, and they issue an invoice. Very simple.
Interesting.
But there are many other contracts out there. Our sister label Pure Pleasure in the UK, for example, they pay just one step license, a fixed amount, and he can press as many LPs as he wants. There are contracts out there where they limit themselves to a certain number and pay it in advance. There are many different contracts out there, but it's always a fixed percentage on the PPD.
No, so it changes a lot from label to label, I guess.
Yeah,
That's
it
something
does.
that's something interesting.
Yeah.
No, because as you know, I mean, I think it's very nice of you to put this, to write this, that all mechanical license are paid, the
Yeah.
rights are paid. I mean, congratulations for being so transparent and
Yeah,
accurate.
this is extremely important to us. You should know, these labels. I think these we can name, Pan Am Sound. The Spanish, the Russian labels, Lilith Records, for example, which are all pressing material which is rights free. They are much too expensive. I'm really jealous how much money they earn, because they don't pay licenses. They use digital mastering. Their LPs should be less than 10 euros, and they charge over 20. So there is a profit involved in these recordings, in these products. I wish I would earn this money.
Exactly. And you know, this is one of the main topics that stimulated me to understand a little better from you what is going on since this problem that is taking place with MoFi, which obviously is doing an excellent job from a digital point of view, because they are getting the master tapes and they're doing a digital
Yeah, yeah.
master
But you
format.
can but you can assume that the big names like Analog Productions, MoFi, you name them, Us, Intervention Records, they all pay their licenses.
No, no, well, of course,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
Uh, but for example, I was reading in the website Pure Analog that you were underlining, in fact, that an analog record, 100% AAA, is an expensive product. In contrast from, for example, these Russian productions. Can you explain us a little better? We have an idea clearly from all this licensing, but a better
Um,
idea of the cost, why an analog production record is so expensive to make.
the license rates are always the same. This does not depend if you do it AAA or
No,
DDA. This does not make a
of
difference.
course, of
Also, the
course.
pressing does not make a difference, except that obviously Pallas is more expensive than GZ Media in Czechoslovakia. This is, I believe, the cheapest one you can get in Europe. The problem, the expenses are lying in the mastering. That an engineer takes time, that we give them the time, that the machinery is very expensive. If this is not a studio which is existing since decades, Emil Berliner studios, for example, have their cutting lathe since the 80s, because this was the former studio of Deutsche Grammophon. So they don't have to buy anything. But still, if you have the gear, an analog A80 an 80 with an analog delay, a VMS 80, proper speakers, proper amplifiers, etc. It costs huge money to get this up to date. I know that there is I don't know his name, I could find this out. There's a guy in the UK in the 80s traveling the world, adjusting Neumann cutting lathes, because nobody else can do this. This reflects in the studio time, and this is what I said. You pay at least $1,000 for mastering a pure analog LP, while making it from digital with a manual delay with an engineer which is standing next to the machine, you can get for a few €100. So this is keeping the machines up to date, is inflecting the rates of the studio, and this makes analog mastering expensive. And that's the reason that I say that if you have spent these expenses 3-4 times more than a digital cut, you write it on the LP, and when it's not written on the LP, it's not analog.
Mm-hmm. In fact,
I know that I disappoint a lot of people with this, because when you buy in the last 10-15 years LPs, and you're standing in the record shop and see, oh, this is the LP I always wanted to have. There's a new Reissue. This is much likely better than the one I have at home, and you buy it. That I have to disappoint the customer that it is very likely digital, but this is how it is today.
absolutely, absolutely, unfortunately. And that's the whole point why you would go to buy an audiophile recording. I mean, it's not because something is done more fancy, it's because it's more faithful to the original
Yeah, yeah.
release. That's the main thing. Plus, I must underline that if you have a digital master, you can do more copies. I mean, you don't have to. Obviously, you have to
Uh,
do a lacquer, which is limited, but you can do more lacquers.
yeah.
You don't have to send the master tape to the facility to do. I mean, it's easier. Do you agree with that?
It is, of course, and what you keep in mind, if you would be Mr. Universal, who's not existing, obviously, the master tapes are the most precious thing you have in your vaults. This is the basis of your company. I remember Tony Hawkins, who said, even if a tape is totally damaged and unplayable, and the magnetic oxide have come off the tape, you never ever throw it away, because there might be a process where you can make it playable again in the
In the
future.
future,
So
yes, of
this is,
course.
I fully understand that the majors, it's against, it makes my business so difficult, but I can fully understand the majors, the tape owners do not want to send out the original masters. I can remember the very first Verve titles we did cut them from the original masters in New York, and it was a month-long discussion how this transportation has to be insured. And in the end, we had to make an insurance as we would have shipped cash money. So they said the tape is worth $1 million and you insure it for $1 million. So this was in 1993. This was a very awkward thing to say, I want to have an analog tape to master my LP.
Of course.
So this was not an ongoing process. And there we really had to put the major part in cost. That titles were really the insurance from both were in New York. So it was, and in the end, the tape library had put it in his car and did drive it to the studio. So, and that's which insured for $1 million. But this is really the master tape is the most important thing a major has.
Are you able to say a percentage of how many master tapes are going out to the mastering facilities, or working copies of the master tape are going out, more or less,
No,
now?
I mean, I would assume that working copies is for you also analog, or do you count in this also digital files?
No,
Because
no.
this is the standard.
Analog.
Working copies.
More or less. I mean, just an idea if you have.
This is difficult to say and different from label to label. The shipping an analog tape is a so strange process in the meantime that it's very difficult to say there a percentage. I would say the majority still is working copies.
Working
I would
copies.
guess. Yeah, but sending tapes and making a digital file to download, I would say is 99.5% to 0.5%. It's very rare occasion. It is. I remember that we had a contact to BMG Rights, which were very eager to working with us, and they said you only get digital files, no working copies, no master tapes, and this was the end of the discussion. So sending around tapes is very unusual.
Well, of course, unfortunately, and it's going to be
yeah.
more difficult.
It will get worse.
Exactly.
Yeah, it will get worse. Yeah.
Clearly. Okay, can you tell us a little bit more about the pressing costs, more or less?
The pressing costs. You get at Palace, which is premium price, the most expensive you can get in Europe. You pay around €2 per LP, 180 gram with extended cooling down times and one-to-one hand inspection, where still a lot of defect records slip through, but this is handmade work. This is expensive. You can get less than €1 at higher numbers from GZ Media, but we pay around €2. But what is not included in this is the metalwork. This is on top. So coming to the stampers, and then we have a new stamper for every new pressing run. We don't use. You can use a stamper if nothing goes wrong, up to 10,000 pieces. We change with every new pressing run the stamper, and this is not included in the price. This is also a few €100, and again on top of the pressing price.
Do you know how much instead is a normal pressing cost with a normal?
Yeah, as I said, at GZ Media you can pay less than €1.
Okay, so more than double at Palace.
Yeah,
but you get the best of the best. Well, if you multiply that for all the thousands of copies, that's another big cost you have to face.
It is, yeah. And still, the major points, I would say, if I would have to make a list, the most expensive ones is the mastering, then the licenses, then the reproduction of label and sleeve. Actually, the sleeve are in the meantime the same prices as the LP. Yeah, if we talk about the pressing of the LP, we didn't talk about the sleeves, which are almost the same price.
Really?
Also, depending on the pressing.
Yeah, that was my next question. Can you talk us a little bit about the artwork, how you managed to recreate it, and the involved costs?
The most depending, of course, it's most tempting to make the records which are most in demand, and these which are most in demand are the ones which are the most expensive ones. So you're a collector, you know that it is easy to pay a few €100, dollars for an original Atlantic recording. I don't know if you have noticed our own Coleman title with the cut in the sleeve.
Which one?
Ornette Coleman.
Oh, Ornette Coleman.
Change of the Century. Do I have time to get it and I can show it to you?
Sure. I'll just cut it. Yeah. Sure. Thank you.
This is just a recent. Can you see this? Yeah. This is just a recent sample. We did the Ella Fitzgerald Gershwin songbook, which was a box with 4 LPs, a book which was extremely expensive to recreate, prints, etc., etc. But this is a recent. We buy an original copy, obviously, and this was a. You can look it up at Discogs. If you want really a stereo original, you pay a few €100 for this. We have a special scanner because it's oversized. You can't put it on a normal DIN A4 scanner. You need a special scanner. Then we have a graphic designer who produced this, and especially difficult was the Jackson Pollock picture. This was very soft reproduced in the original. Yes. So we went to the rights owner of this painting and licensed this again.
That's another cost there.
So can you see this? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that we have this in glorious color, sharp, as crisp, very crisp, and this costs money, obviously. Also, our graphic designer charges just below €100 per hour, and if it is difficult, sometimes you only get a sample which has bent corners, as used 50 year-old records are. So he has to recreate sometimes the sleeve. It takes up to 10 to 12 hours to reproduce sleeve and label.
Thank you also for covering that. I mean, you're doing also an excellent job also on the covers. So, okay. So, at this point, I wanted to ask you, what is the most difficult part, the most difficult challenge you face in putting out a
licenses?
Right.
licenses.
Time
Yeah, I'm
consuming.
sorry that I always have to come back to this. There's already, as we call it in Germany, a scissors in your head. You don't, as I said, we were working with with Warner mainly in the meantime. You even don't ask for Eagles, you don't ask for Doors. We are prohibited to ask for Aretha Franklin, Joni Mitchell. So you're not allowed to ask because it's a waste of time. So we have a German contact who goes through the list first, and there already these titles are picked out. They even don't get to the USA. And from the latest list, we put always in a list of 10 to 15 titles. I got one approval, two which are still in the approval process, which might get approved, and the others were all denied. So I have a percentage of 10 to 30% of approvals we get. And this is I was surprised to get the Ornette Coleman, because this is first-class repertoire, but this worked, and it's one of our bestsellers last year. But the major challenge is licenses.
Congratulations. No, I bet. So can you tell us more or less how long is the entire process from your point of view, from First Per Speaker's Corner,
from the
when you
idea,
decide a record to releasing it?
Months.
Okay.
Already the approval process is 3 to 4 months. Then our contact in Germany advises Warner US to send the tapes to Kevin. Then Kevin must have the time. So I would say always 4 to 6 weeks when he has the tape on his desk until the lacquers are at QRP. Then QRP has to do the metalworks and send us the tools 2 to 3 weeks. And when it's in Palace, we are, it depends. When we are at Palace, we have a special agreement with Palace at the moment. When I order an LP today, I get it in 8 to 10 months. We have another agreement with them. We have a fixed standing order of 8,000 LPs per month. In 2 or 3 months before, we can say we are now fixing, for example, the December represses. We want to have in December these and these titles up to 8,000 in the sum. And there I can squeeze in a new release. So also 2 to 3 months. So in the end, it's at least half a year.
Well,
takes very long. At the moment, yes.
Yeah, compared, I mean, to digital releases, it's long probably, but it's reasonable. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Are you able?
And this is the reason that.
I'm sorry.
And that's the reason that we don't announce like the Americans at the moment where the ink on the contract has not dried. We only announce this when we have the finished test pressing on our desk. So the waiting time is not there.
Okay. No, well, reasonable. I understand that.
Our advantage is that we have such a big back catalog. We have titles which we have still in print from the very first day. From the first 4 LPs we ever put out, 1 is still in our catalog. We have such a probably you know this better than us, but I believe that we have at least one of the largest audiophile LP catalogs on the whole market, and this is our advantage.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to ask. So you can keep in catalog some titles, most of them.
Yeah, as long as the licenses are valid. With 2 of the majors, we have an ongoing contract which renews every year, and all the titles covered with this contract are still can be made by us. And as Warner, which are time limited, they're the most contracts are 5 years, and some of them get renewed, some not.
So, but every time the master tape has to travel again to the mastering facility?
No, we always use the same tools.
Oh, okay. So you're making some plating, and then you keep them for the future, or no?
No, this is done depending on our represses. So when we put in, for example, as I said, the initial pressing run is 1,000 pieces. When they are sold out and we order the next 500, they make a new tool from the mother. Okay. And you can press in theory 10,000 copies from a stamper. I don't know how many stampers you can make from a mother, and I don't know how many mothers you can make from a father. But there's no need to make new tools. So this is we have the actually. What you also keep in mind is that the tapes for all the titles we love so much are not getting newer. These tapes deteriorate. You have pre-echoes actually, what is MoFi doing? They're doing it digitally. Has the advantage that you can hold the time. One has to be fair to say this. You know, that is you can. I once joined a mastering session of Mercury Living Presence titles. You know, these are the ones on 35mm films, which have deteriorated a lot. Yes. The tape is wobbling on the machine, looks awful. And they had to be digitally remastered because otherwise they are not playable anymore. And you can do digitally everything, really everything. You can remove clicks, speeds, variations. You can replace a voice, an instrument from another part of the recording. You can do literally everything. And there you can also stop the deterioration. And that's a big question, if you want this, if you accept it or not. And how did we come to that? Yeah, and the tapes, I'm happy that we have, for example, the Decca tapes. They obviously used tapes which are very prone to pre-echoes. The last Decca tapes, which we did 10, 15 years ago, had massive pre-echoes, and there it was obvious this was the last run of Decca titles we would do, because in analog you can't do anything against pre-echoes on the tape. Yes. They are there, you know. And if you do, we have these Mancini titles, for example. They are also 15 years, 20 years old, and the tape were 20 years younger. You couldn't do a similar cut today because the tapes have deteriorated in the meantime. You would have lost some of the upper frequencies. The time is working against us, not for us.
I see. So going back to the beginning of my question, in the end, after a certain amount of time, because the fathers and mothers are going to finish, you have to start over. But it takes some years, I believe. I mean, starting over the whole process, getting again the master tape to do new fathers and mothers.
Yeah, but this was never necessary. We had on one occasion it was necessary. We had to recut a title, but on all our other releases, the fathers, the mothers were always fine, and we didn't have to recut anything.
Because you're not doing that many copies in the end, I think. I mean,
yeah,
not
that's the point. Yeah.
50.
I wish I would do so many copies that I had to recut, exactly. But this has never happened. Exactly. Only happened once.
Okay. I forgot to ask you about distribution. Is that something that touches you, or it's somebody else that takes care of that?
We did this in the beginning, all the years actually till April this year, and there we gave it to a younger guy, which is very active. I admire him, how active he is. He should do it. It's fine. We remain with manufacturing and producing, but the distribution we gave it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, please tell him to send a little more copies in Italy, because it's difficult to find them. They finish immediately.
Yeah, actually, this is something we could discuss when your camera is switched off.
Okay.
We had a fantastic distributor in Italy, Alfredo Galacci. I don't know if you know him from Sound and Music.
Oh,
you don't know him? Okay.
Yeah, I do. Okay, Sound and Music. Yes, Alfredo. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was for years very, very active, but this is a different subject.
Okay. Last question, and we reached the end. Can you tell us what is your biggest satisfaction in your career?
Biggest satisfaction in my career. This is an interesting question. I must say, I mean, I'm now almost 30 years in this business, and obviously there had been, we have visited, there are a lot of stories which we met artists, we met famous cutting engineers. I remember a party in New York where I had a very funny conversation with Doug Sachs, which is dead in the meantime. There are many, many interesting points, but I must say that at least in this century, my biggest satisfaction in my career is the MoFi gate.
That's an interesting reply.
Michael Iposito is a dealer from us, and we sent him a big thank you for doing the interview. But that in the public, out there in the public, is now coming to the conclusion that they, as we say in Germany, they are also only boiling with water. Nothing else is what we give them a big set. I'm sorry about this, but because I fear that this gives the people the impression that they can trust anybody. That I can tell what we tell since decades, that we are mastering pure analog, that they say, oh, if mobile fidelity is not saying entirely the truth, they also don't saying this.
Exactly.
This is the downside, but that they are also just a normal record label which are trying to their best. And I believe that they believe that what they are doing is the best they can do. Like us, this is a big satisfaction to me. Of course.
I agree. And congratulations, because I am a customer and I really like what you're doing, and that's why I immediately looked out for you, and I'm glad you participated to this interview.
I'm glad that you came across us, because actually this is the first interview. I know this is very fashionable at the moment. You see, you obviously look these interviews with Bernie Grundman, with Chad, Ryan Smith, etc. This is the first I give.
Great, I'm glad. I'm glad to be the first. Well, thank you again, Kai, for your availability for this hour and almost an hour and a half. And maybe we'll do this again. There are other questions, I'm sure.
Yeah, we touch everything only at the surface, and if there is anything, I'm always there for you.
Perfect. Thank you again so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao. Well, guys, if you're enjoying my videos and you're enjoying my channel, please consider to subscribe by clicking the black and white logo here below. Also, don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll never miss an episode and you will become a true member of the analog community.